Our Q3 analysis shows a 15% efficiency gain from the new protocols. This positions us to exceed targets by year-end.
What about the clause in 11 slide?
I was not sure about that.
The presentation was already on slide 7 when the door opened. Becca didn't look back. She knew better than to look back. She had been told twice that senior partners occasionally walked through junior analyst presentations without warning, that it meant nothing, that it was routine. And she had believed that right up until the moment the entire room stopped making eye contact with her and started making it with whoever had just walked in behind her. She kept talking. Slide 8. Revenue projections, Q3 forward. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not, but she had the clicker, so that was manageable. The room had 12 people in it. It now felt like it had one. She still didn't look back. The margin compression in the Midwest portfolio, she said, is steeper than the model initially suggested. And I want to be upfront about that. I flagged it in the footnotes, but I should have led with it. The number on slide 4 is technically correct. It is also misleading without context. And I caught that at 9:15 this morning. And I should have revised the deck before coming in here, nobody said. Anything. She clicked to the next slide. The room stayed, quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like everyone had collectively decided to be very still. She finished the presentation. She said thank you. She clicked off the projector. And then finally, she turned around. Pierce Whitmore was standing at the back of the room with his arms crossed and his jacket on, which meant he had come from somewhere else and had not bothered to sit down. He was 42 years old and looked like a man who had stopped performing efforts somewhere in his mid-30s and had not missed it since. He was not looking at the screen. He was looking at her. The senior analysts filed out. One of them touched her shoulder on the way past, a small, reassuring gesture that somehow made her more nervous, not less. The room emptied. Pierce didn't move. Becca started stacking her folders. A footnote, he said. His voice was not loud. It was not soft either. It was level, the kind of level that happened on purpose. She stopped stacking. The one on page 11, he continued. The one you almost cut? She turned to face him. How did you know I almost cut it? Because it's written differently than the rest. The sentence structure is shorter. People write shorter sentences when they're not sure something should be there. Becca looked at him for a moment. I wasn't sure it should be there. Why did you keep it? Because I wasn't sure it shouldn't be either. He held her gaze for a beat that lasted slightly too long. Then he uncrossed his arms and walked out. That was it. That was the whole conversation. Becca stood in the empty conference room and replayed it twice, trying to determine if she had been reprimanded or not. She genuinely could not tell. She found out on Thursday from Derek Holt that Pierce had never once attended a junior analyst presentation in the 3 years. Derek had been at the firm. Derek mentioned this the way people mention things they want you to be worried about casually. While refilling his coffee, with his back half turned, he doesn't come to those, Derek said. Just so you know. He doesn't come to those. Becca rode the elevator back to her floor and stared at the number panel. She didn't know what to do with that information. She filed it next to the footnote comment and the too long gaze and tried not to build anything out of those 3 things. Because building things out of 3 data points was how people ended up embarrassed. She started working differently after that. Not performing, she had never been a good performer. But tighter, sharper. She started asking the questions she had been saving for later and stopped, waiting until she was certain before she said something. She was not sure where the impulse came from. She was fairly sure she knew, though. Thursday that changed things didn't start with. Pierce, it started with a 17-year-old girl sitting cross-legged on the lobby bench with a backpack that had a small, embroidered patch of a narwhal on it, eating a granola bar and looking entirely unbothered by the fact that she was in the lobby of a private equity firm. Becca was coming back from lunch. She stopped at the reception desk, and the receptionist gave her a look that communicated everything. I don't know what to do with her, and I'm relieved you're here. Hi, Becca said. Hi, the girl looked up. She had Pierce's coloring, dark hair, dark eyes, and absolutely none of his economy of expression. Her face did everything freely. I'm Penny. My uncle's driver got the time wrong. Are you someone's assistant? I'm a junior analyst. What does that mean? I look at numbers and tell people things they already know but need confirmed in writing. Penny considered this. That sounds exhausting. It has its moments. Penny slid over on the bench without being asked. Becca sat down. They were waiting for Pierce, who was, according to the receptionist, finishing a call. The call had been running 17 minutes and showed no signs of concluding. Becca had nowhere urgent to be. Penny had already finished the granola bar and was now interested in Becca's phone. Is that a Chicago architecture walking tour app? Yes. Do you actually use it? Every Saturday. I'm not from here. I've been trying to learn the city. That is both nerdy and kind of great, Penny said. Can I see? So Becca handed over her phone, and Penny started scrolling through saved routes with the focused attention of someone who was genuinely interested rather than politely pretending. And they ended up leaning together over the screen while Penny asked questions about buildings Becca had visited. And Becca described a gargoyle on the Tribune Tower with more enthusiasm than she had intended. And Penny laughed a real bright laugh and said, "Okay, you're actually going to have to show me this." "I will," Becca said. She meant it. "I'm going to tell my uncle you said that so you can't take it back. Go ahead." Neither of them heard the elevator. Pierce stepped out and stopped. His niece and the junior analyst from the third floor were sitting shoulder to shoulder on the lobby bench. Becca's phone between them, Penny's laugh still finishing in the air. Becca was pointing at something on the screen. Penny was already leaning in to look. Pierce stood there for 11 seconds. He counted them without meaning to. Something happened in his chest. Quiet, unwelcome, specific. He recognized it. He had not felt it in a long time, and he had no interest in examining it in a lobby at 3:45 on a Thursday. After noon, he walked forward. "Penny." Penny looked up, completely unembarrassed. "Your analyst is cool. She knows about gargoyles." Pierce looked at Becca. Becca stood up and handed Penny her phone back and said, "She's been very patient waiting." The driver miscommunication wasn't anyone's fault. She was doing it again, the thing she did, where she headed off blame before anyone assigned it. He had noticed it in the presentation. He had noticed it 3 times since. She apologized preemptively for things that had not yet been called mistakes, and somehow it didn't read as weakness. It read as someone who had learned to manage a room before the room could manage her. He found that, specifically, very difficult to stop thinking about. "Thank you," he said, "for waiting with her." He didn't say the last part. Becca nodded. She picked up her bag. She was already stepping back toward the elevator, giving them space, not making it a moment, and somehow. The not making it a moment made it one anyway. Thursday. Late. Most of the floor had gone home. Becca was in the break room with a stack of quarterly reports and the kind of focus that came from the second wind after dinner, not the first wind of morning. She had her shoes off. She would put them back on if anyone came in. This was a compromise she had made with herself in week 2. She heard the door. She put her shoes on. Pierce came in. He registered her presence, a brief, complete inventory, the way he registered everything, and then he went to the coffee machine without comment. She went back to her documents. The coffee machine ran. She could hear the rain starting outside. The building was very quiet for a building this size. She had been here 3 months. She still didn't entirely believe this place was real. The clean lines of it. The money that sat in the walls like insulation. She had grown up in a house where the heat was rationed in January. She had told herself that was why she worked the way she worked, but she was starting to think it was simpler than that. She just liked being good at things. She liked knowing something cold and complicated well enough to make it make sense. She was writing a note in the margin of her report when Pierce set a full coffee mug next to her stack of documents. She had not asked. Her original mug had been empty for 40 minutes, and she had not gotten up because she was deep in the numbers and she had not wanted to break the thread. She looked at the mug. She looked at the empty space where he had been. Standing, he was already back at the machine, pouring his own coffee. He didn't say anything about it. He wasn't performing generosity. He had simply noticed and acted and moved on, which was somehow the most disorienting version of the gesture. "Thank you," she said to her papers. He didn't respond. She hadn't expected him to. He stood at the counter and drank his coffee for a few minutes. Not uncomfortable with the silence. Not filling it. Just present she worked. He stood there. The rain came harder against the windows. He left without saying, "Good night." She sat with the warm mug for a moment after he was gone and told herself very firmly that it was just coffee. Efficient even, 1 trip instead of 2. That was all. She did not entirely believe herself. It came up on a Friday. Becca was in the hall outside the conference room, wrapping up a call. And Pierce came out of the elevator at the wrong moment. She hadn't expected him, and she said quickly into the phone, "I'll send it over tonight," David said. The methodology was solid, so I'm going with it, and she hung up. Pierce had slowed down. "Just slightly, David," he said. "Farrow. My old professor at Northwestern. He was the one who pushed me to apply here, actually. He wrote my reference letter." Something happened to Pierce's face. It was 1 second, maybe less, a tightening around the jaw, a look that was not quite blankness and not quite recognition. He recovered immediately, fully, if she had been watching the floor instead of his face. She would have missed it entirely. "Good reference," he said, flat. Moving again, she watched him walk down the hall. She was not sure what she had said wrong. She turned it over twice in her head and couldn't find the era. What she didn't know, what she had no reason to know, was that Pierce Whitmore had sat in his office 8 weeks earlier and manually pulled the application of a junior analyst named Becca Shaw, not because of her numbers or her university or her work history, but because of a name in the reference section, a name he had not spoken to in 7 years. A name that arrived in his building like a question he hadn't decided whether to answer. He had approved the hire. He had told himself it was a business decision by Friday of her first week. He had stopped thinking about David Farrow. He had not in the weeks since. Stopped thinking about the footnote. It was 8:15 when he pulled up her application on his desktop. He had read it already. He had read it 3 times if he was being honest with himself. Which he was, privately, reluctantly. In the way a precise man admits something that doesn't fit the pattern, he read it again. The rain was still going. The office was empty. He sat in the quiet of a building he owned and read the application of a 26-year-old woman from a small town in Ohio who had written in her personal statement, "I tend to say the wrong thing at the right moment. I am working on that. I am also starting to think it might be the most useful thing about me." He sat with that for a long time. He was not thinking about Farrow. He was not thinking about the reference letter, or the 7-year silence, or the question he had originally been trying to answer. He was thinking about a girl who kept a footnote she wasn't sure of. He closed the application. Didn't close the window. The client's name was Warren Aldrich, and he laughed too loud and touched elbows. Becca didn't notice it the first time. She was focused on the numbers. On the projection she had built over 4 days and was now defending across a lunch table at a restaurant that had no prices on the menu, which she had clocked immediately and had been trying not to think about since. They sat down. Aldrich was in his mid-50s, successful in the way that had curdled slightly into entitlement, and he had taken to Becca within the first 10 minutes with the specific enthusiasm of a man who had decided she was charming before she had said anything charming. He called her sharp. He said it twice. He touched her elbow when he laughed. Pierce was sitting across the table. He had not looked at his menu. He had been watching the meeting with the particular stillness he brought to things he was assessing. And Becca had been doing her job well enough that she hadn't needed to look at him for reassurance, which was its own kind of relief. Aldrich pushed back on the cue for projection, not with a question with volume. He set his fork down, and his voice went up, and he said the number was aggressive and that he hadn't stayed in business 30 years by signing off on aggressive numbers. From people who hadn't been in the industry 30 months, the table went quiet. Becca looked at Aldrich. She did not look at Pierce. "The number is aggressive," she said. "That's accurate." It's aggressive because the window for this position closes in February. And a conservative entry at that timeline produces a return that doesn't justify the transaction costs. I can model the conservative version for you if you'd like to see it in writing, but I think you already know what it shows. Aldrich stared at her. The aggressive number, she continued, calmly, is the honest one, as the volume didn't come back. Aldrich picked up his fork. He said he'd review the full model by end of week. And the lunch moved on, and Becca reached for her water glass with a hand that was almost entirely steady. She did not. See what Pierce did with his face in the 3 seconds after she spoke. Narration will tell you. His jaw had been tight since the second elbow touch. When she held her ground, no flinching, no softening, just the clean delivery of something true, something in him released. Not relaxed, released. Like a wire that had been pulled and was finally allowed to go slack. He looked at her and thought, with a clarity that was almost inconvenient, she has no idea how good she is at this. He thought it and said nothing, and cut his steak. The restaurant emptied out around them, while Aldrich finished his dessert and talked about a property he was considering in Scottsdale. Becca listened with the patient attention of someone who understood that the meeting didn't end when the business did. Aldrich left first. Handshakes, card exchange, the loud warmth of a man who had gotten what he came for, and was now generous about it. Then it was just the two of them at the table. And the busboy clearing the breadbasket, and the afternoon light coming through the windows at an angle that made the restaurant feel later than it was. Pierce looked at her. You didn't move, he said. Becca glanced up. I'm sorry. When he got loud, you didn't move. She looked at him for a moment, trying to read the register. Was that a compliment? Was that an observation? Was that both? I didn't think moving would help, she said. Doesn't most people do it anyway? He set his water glass down. Half the people I pay to sit in that chair would have walked the number back. You didn't walk it back? She didn't know what to do with that. She could feel the compliment in it, direct, specific, unmistakable, and she had no clean way to receive it, so she said, I almost walked it back. Right before he got loud, I was already thinking about how to soften it, but you didn't, but I didn't. Pierce looked at her the way he had looked at her in the conference room the first week. That beat that went 1 second too long that said he was filing something away. Then he reached for his jacket and said they should get back. And the moment closed, and Becca sat with it in the back of the car and turned it over like something she had found on the ground and wasn't sure yet whether to keep. The paperwork was not supposed to be on her desk. It was a routing error, an internal memo that had been misfiled into the wrong analyst's inbox. Something administrative about the Q1 hiring review. Becca had opened it before she realized it wasn't for her, and she had already read the first page before she saw her own name. Application: Shaw, Rebecca. Status: flagged for manual review. Reviewed by P. Whitmore. She read it twice. Then she closed it and sat very still in her chair for a long time. She was not angry. That was the thing that surprised her. She went looking for anger and found something quieter and more complicated. She felt the way she had felt once as a kid, when she'd found out a conversation had been happening about her for weeks before anyone told her. Not betrayed. Just outside of something she had thought she was inside of. She had walked into this building 3 months ago believing she had gotten the job because of her work. She had the grades, the references, the internship hours. She had built the application over 2 months, and she had been proud of it. And that pride had carried her through the first hard weeks when she had not known anyone in the city had felt too big, and the job had felt too much. She sat with the document closed on her screen. She gave herself 48 hours. She went home. She slept badly. She went to work and did the work and did not look at Pierce differently in the hallways, or tried not to, though she was aware that trying not to look at someone differently was itself a way of looking at them differently. On the second night she stopped negotiating with herself. She needed to know why. It was Penny who broke the 2 days open. And she did it without knowing there was anything to break. She texted Becca on a Wednesday afternoon from a number Becca didn't recognize. Hi, it's Penny. I got your number from my uncle's phone. I hope that's okay. It's definitely okay, right? My art show is Friday night. You should come. It's at my school. My uncle is going to stand there looking serious at my paintings, and I need moral support." Becca looked at her phone. She typed back, "How did you get into his phone? He leaves it on the counter when he makes coffee. It's not my fault he doesn't have a passcode. Are you coming or not?" Becca went. The school was in Lincoln Park. A big brick building with the art show spread across the gymnasium and the hallways. Student work hung at varying heights with small white cards listing names and titles. It smelled like a gymnasium trying to smell like a gallery, which meant floor wax and spray, mount and someone's mom's perfume. Penny found her at the door and immediately pulled her toward a series of large format photographs along the back wall. Penny's work. Urban light studies. Genuinely striking in the way that made Becca think the talent was real and not just proud relative real. "These are good," Becca said, and meant it. "I know," Penny said, without false modesty, and Becca laughed. She saw Pierce 20 minutes later. He was standing in front of Penny's third photograph, the best one. Chicago pre-dawn from somewhere high up. All gray and amber, with his coat still on, and Penny's extra program folded in his hand. He hadn't seen Becca yet. Penny said something to him, gesturing at the photograph, explaining something about the light timing. Pierce listened. Then Penny said something else. Becca was too far to hear, and Pierce laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not the controlled, minimal version. A real one, sudden and warm, his head dropping slightly, one hand going to Penny's shoulder. It lasted about 4 seconds. Becca watched. She had spent 3 months thinking of Pierce Whitmore as a force that moved through rooms and left them reorganized. She had thought of him in vertical terms, above, looking down, assessing. She had built the ceiling herself and put him on it and used it too. Stay in her lane. She stopped doing that in this gymnasium on a Friday night. He was just a man in a coat who saved the extra. Programman laughed at his niece's jokes. He was just a person who had lost someone, Penny's mother. She had gathered without being told and had rearranged his life around the gap that left. He was 42 years old, and he was standing in a school gymnasium, and he was happy. In the specific way of someone who only lets themselves be happy when they are sure no one important is watching. Penny spotted Becca and waved enormously. Pierce turned. He saw her. His expression did not change in any dramatic way. But he looked at her standing there in her coat with her hands in her pockets, and something moved behind his eyes. Recognition. And then something past recognition that he didn't finish. "You came," Penny said. "I said I would," Becca said. Pierce said nothing. He handed Penny the extra program. He stepped slightly to the side, making room. And the three of them stood in front of the photograph together. And Penny talked about f-stops, and Becca asked questions, and Pierce stood close enough that Becca was aware of exactly how close he was standing. And neither of them said anything about it. She asked him on a Monday, end of the day. The floor almost empty, the sky outside already dark. She had rehearsed it and then decided rehearsing was making her cowardly. So she stopped. She knocked on his open office door. He looked up. "My application was flagged," she said. "Manually reviewed. I saw the memo last week. I want to know why you pulled it." Pierce set his pen down. He was still for a moment, not frozen, just settling, the way he settled before he said something he meant. "David Farrow," he said, "my professor. You were close. A long time ago. We stopped speaking." He paused. "When his name came through on a reference letter, I wanted to know what he was sending me." Becca held that. "You thought he was testing you?" "I thought it was possible." "Was he?" "I don't know. I didn't ask him." She looked at him across the desk. The office was quiet. The city was doing its thing outside the window, indifferent and enormous. "And now?" she said. Pierce held her gaze. He did not look away, and he did not answer, and the not answering was so complete and so deliberate that it was its own kind of answer, the kind that cost. Something to give. She nodded once. She walked out. She was not angry. She was full up to the edges with something she didn't have a clean word for, and she needed air, and she needed the train. And she needed the 40-minute ride home too. figure out what she was going to do with the fact that she had her answer, and it had not made anything simpler. He was at the bottom of her steps on Saturday morning. She came out at 8:15 with her tote bag and her walking app and her plan to spend the morning doing something that had nothing to do with work. And Pierce Whitmore was standing on the sidewalk in a coat she hadn't seen before. Regular, dark, not the office version. Was holding 2 coffee cups. He had no professional reason to be there. He had not called. Becca stopped on the top step and looked at him. He looked back. "I owe you the rest of the answer," he said. She didn't move toward him, and she didn't move away. She sat down on the top step instead, pulling her coat around her, and waited. Pierce came up 2 steps and sat on the one below her. He held out a coffee. She took it. "Pharaoh sent you," he said. Whether he meant it as a test, or an olive branch, or just a coincidence, I don't know. I stopped trying to figure that out inside your first week. He looked at the street. A car went by. Someone's dog was being walked badly on the opposite sidewalk. He was quiet for long enough that she almost said something to fill it. And then he said, "Because you kept a footnote you weren't sure of. Because you sat in my lobby with my niece and made her laugh for 20 minutes without trying. Because you didn't walk that number back when Aldrich got loud." He paused. "Because I refilled your coffee in the break room and told myself it was efficient, and I have not once in my life done something like that because it was efficient." Gah. Looked at the side of his face. "I don't know what to do with you," he said. "I have been trying to work that out for 2 months. I am not a person who is comfortable not knowing something." No. He turned and looked at her directly. "I'm telling you that I don't say things I don't mean, and I don't say things before I'm sure. I'm not sure. I'm telling you anyway." The morning was cold and bright. Somewhere down the block, someone was running. The city was just being the city, enormous and indifferent. And Becca was sitting on her front steps, holding a coffee she hadn't asked for, looking at a man who had just handed her something that had clearly cost him a great deal to carry down. "Here, so figure it out," she said. It was quiet for a moment. Then Pierce reached up from the step below her and took her hand. Not quickly, not as a gesture. He held it the way someone holds something they have decided to keep carefully. With the full weight of having decided, he didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Becca looked at their hands and then looked at him. And he was watching her with the expression she had seen once in the gymnasium, the one he only let himself have when he thought no one important was watching, except he knew she was watching. He just didn't stop. He had spent 42 years being certain. Before he moved, he had moved anyway, for the first time in as long as he could remember. He had not needed to be sure of the outcome. She was already there on the step above him in the cold morning light. And she was not pulling her hand back, and that was the only thing that had ever needed to be true.